Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
And today we're going to talk about the latest in battery technology, or how to capture sunlight in a bottle.
Wow.
That's
I don't know how you come up with these topics, but it's amazing. I'm amazed. So.
You're giving me a look like not that amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there is not goats. Anyway, so let's talk about how batteries work, because I think they're pretty complicated, aren't they?
Well, you know, they are and they're not. You could make anything really complicated, but essentially all the way back to Alexander Volta, who created the very first working battery, which he called the voltaic pile. But there are really only three parts to a typical battery. There's an anode, which is the negatively charged bit, the cathode, which is the positively charged bit, and then there's an electrolyte that keeps these two things separated. And the way you get electricity is when electrons flow from one to the other. So if one's positively, one's negatively, and they're separated and they can't recombine because everything in the universe wants to get to some state of Zen, some state of harmony, then you get electricity flow when you create a circuit. And once those things are in complete harmony with each other, what do we call that when we're talking about batteries?
Life?
No. A dead battery.
A dead battery.
A dead battery, right? So a dead battery is basically
well, it could be life.
Well, eventually we're in that same state.
That's right.
But this is basically how batteries work. So you have an imbalance of charge and something separating them so they can only combine by some sort of circuit.
And it seems to me like batteries haven't really changed all that much since they were invented. So what are some of the issues about batteries and how we use them? And
well, the very first batteries, of course, even like the potato batteries you made in grade school or whatever, a lot of those things, the lead-acid battery has become sort of the standard. They've been around forever. But in recent years, we're seeing more and more of our products, more and more of our technology relying on lithium-ion batteries. And conceptually,
it's
difference?
The
same. Well, the way they're made, the way they function. There's really you've got a negative, you've got a positive, and you're keeping those things from mixing, having to go through a circuit. So in that way, all batteries operate the same. But there are certain issues around batteries that we need to address. One has to do with energy density, which is essentially how much weight, how much volume is there for a certain amount of energy this thing is going to produce. So the more energy dense a battery is, the lighter and smaller it can be. That's why lithium-ion has that advantage over lead-acid. That's why you don't carry around a lead-acid battery in your cell phone, because first
you wouldn't be able to.
It would slosh. It would slosh around. Yeah, but you're just pointing out that's energy density. Another has to do with charging memory. Some of the old NiCad batteries, for instance, you had to fully discharge them all the way because they would develop a memory, and that causes problems. The rate of how quickly a battery charges, that's another big issue. And we're seeing that with cell phones. I mean, you see any millennial, any teenage kid now is all freaked out about how long it takes for their cell phone to charge because they're out of communication for 10 minutes. So that's an issue. But electric vehicles are a bigger issue. If it takes you 6 hours to recharge your electric vehicle, that's a long stop at your local gas station, you know. But if it takes you 10 minutes, well, that's acceptable. So that's something that is changing in battery technologies. Self-discharge is another issue. We've all experienced this where you set a battery somewhere, a battery on the shelf or whatever, come back and it's dead. You know, if you leave it alone over time, it loses some of its charge. So that's how quickly they self-discharge. And they're coming up with batteries that don't self-discharge really at all. So you charge them and they're going to hold that charge for a long, long time. Life expectancy, how long is this thing going to last? That's a big deal, especially, again, with electric vehicles. If the major part of an electric car is its battery and the battery is only going to last a year, well, that's not a very practical car. But if that battery is going to last 10 years or 20 years, it becomes a big deal.
So I want to ask the question when you bring that up. When you're talking about the different types of batteries and everything, what I just kept thinking about, well, what parts of these batteries are recyclable? Because it seems like they have harmful chemicals, and what they do to the environment when they're thrown into the garbage. And so what parts are...
Well, lead-acid batteries have been a big success story from that standpoint. Even though you're really talking about sulfuric acid, which could be harmful, you're talking about lead, which could be very harmful environmentally.
It is very harmful.
Right, but about 99.9% of lead-acid batteries are recycled. So it has been very successful. In fact, when you go and buy a typical lead-acid battery, you have to pay a deposit. It's the old, pop bottle thing, where you get that money back when you bring back the old battery because it's recycled. Lithium-ion currently has a big problem in that regard, because even though it's a better technology for a lot of the reasons I was just talking about, they're not currently economically recharged. And recycled, recharged. They recharge fine. But recycling
until they're dead.
Yeah, until they're dead.
That's
And then they're thrown
is.
away.
Yeah.
But the problem with lithium ion goes beyond that, because they're very environmentally harmful.
Yeah.
There's some issues around where they're harvested. Most of the lithium in the world, more than 50%, is in three countries, the ABCs: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile.
Is Bolivia? I thought it was Brazil.
No, Bolivia.
Okay.
And then there's also some in Tibet. They're in these very remote, arid, dry areas. Lithium is a salt. It's an element, but it is a salt. And so not only do you have the issue of extraction economies, where people are really put under any time people are harvesting, like the blood diamond kind of situation, you're really taking advantage of local populations in the mining. But they use huge amounts of water. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's some discussions in Bolivia that half of all of the water in that country is being used for mining of lithium. And they bring this up in these great huge pools, and they basically let the water evaporate, and then they harvest the salt. And if these pools break loose, there have been examples of massive wildlife kills, fish kills, livestock kills.
Sense, doesn't it?
So it creates a problem unto itself. And as we become more and more dependent upon lithium, that problem is just going to get worse.
So how have lithium-ion batteries driven the electric vehicle market?
Well, lithium-ion batteries have driven not just the electric vehicle market, but they've driven a lot of consumer electronics, like your laptops, your cell phones. Cell phones would not be what they are without lithium-ion batteries. And a lot of that is because the cost of these batteries has dropped hugely, very dramatically. In fact, in 2010, it cost, and I know this isn't going to mean much to a lot of people, but it was basically $1,200 per kilowatt hour of energy that was produced, per 1,000 watt hours of energy. So in 2010, it was $1,200. In 2019, it was $156. By 2023, it's estimated it'll drop below $100. So really a factor of 10 or 12 times what it was just really a decade ago. So if the price is 1/10 of what it was 10 years ago, then clearly this technology is going to get integrated into a lot of products. And with the electric vehicle, as you asked, about 30% of the cost of an electric vehicle is the battery. So if you're now paying only 10% of what you paid even just 10 years ago, then those electric vehicles become more and more affordable. And not only is the battery getting more affordable, it's getting better. It's getting better in all of those measurements.
But it seems wrong. Because
okay, well, let's stop then.
It shouldn't be cheaper because the true cost of these things are enormous to the environment, and also I think to young people, to children that extract these things. And so it doesn't make sense to me why it's cheaper.
Well, that gets back to the whole economics of externalized costs. So, you could make the same argument about almost anything we consume, the plastics
industries. What the
industries.
true cost is, we don't pay.
Yeah, we don't. But in very real terms, assuming all of those externalized costs existed before, it's a heck of a lot cheaper. Now, from an externalized cost, it's a bigger problem because as things get cheaper, you consume more and more of it. So those external costs get more and more. And those are going to be borne by the poorest people in the most remote regions. But I ain't going to fix that sitting here. I guess I don't have a solution for it, except we all need to just go to solar and wind. And there are alternatives on the horizon.
All right, let's hear about new innovations in battery technology.
In the world of Annie, lithium ion is bad. And I'm going to agree with you on that, even though I'm kind of I love technology. I agree lithium ion has to be a transition from lead acid to whatever is next.
I hope we hurry up because it's really pathetic.
Well, we don't know what's going to be next. The first step, like any new technology, is they're tweaking the lithium ion. So one of the things that they're experimenting with is lithium sulfur batteries. And lithium sulfur batteries use a lot less of these environmentally damaging components, but are also 4 times as energy dense. So essentially you're getting 4 times as much energy for the same amount of size and product and things of that nature.
I just want to say, though, the reason they're doing that is because lithium is not unlimited.
That's
and
true.
They realize that, and also because these countries often have unstable governments. So they're being forced to look other places. They're not doing it because it's bad. The external costs.
Well, I think they're looking at it and saying, I can make more money with this new technology.
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, that's not terrible. I mean, if the end result and the promise of lithium sulfur is that you will get 620 miles to a battery charge on your vehicle, well, that gets past that whole range anxiety issue that has been limiting electric vehicles, where you worry that I charge it up, but I can only go 50 miles. Well, I don't want to have to recharge my battery every 50 miles. That's not so good. So that's an option. They're also looking at substituting silicon for the graphite that's in these batteries. That is supposedly giving them 3 times the performance of the battery. So that's not going to solve your problem, which is, the externalized costs.
They're ruining the earth with it.
But it's going to solve the problem of the person with a cell phone that hates having to recharge it all the time. So now you're going to have batteries that last like 5 days, cell phones that last 5 days on a single charge. I mean, how is that not a better world? Right?
You don't want me to answer
You're
that.
giving me
so
that
are
look.
there other new innovations?
Oh, there are always
technology?
new innovations. But before I get into the new and exciting technologies, there are some ways that they're handling the charging process. And there is a goal. They refer to it as XFC, or extremely fast charging. Everybody loves their acronyms. But the goal here really focuses on vehicle charging. And they're looking to be able to get 200-mile range with a 10-minute charge. And they're approaching that through some of the ways that they're dealing with temperature in the charging process. So it's not just about battery technologies. It's also about some of the innovations surrounding the way you manage and charge batteries.
Inconvenience. Humans hate it.
Oh, we certainly do.
Yes.
And speaking of inconvenience, I will remind you that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. I want to remind you that it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God, but it's not happening fast enough.
Not for you, but it is the end of the battery technology as we know it.
Woo, woo,
not
woo.
quite. Not
I'm
quite.
ready. I'm ready. But there are other things I want.
Well,
to.
I'm going to give you a battery that I think even you will like, the saltwater battery. Saltwater batteries. This is technology that's been around for a while. There's a company called Aqueous, which is headquartered in Pittsburgh. Came out of Carnegie Mellon University. That's in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah. I don't think it's called university, is it?
I don't know. It's called Joe. Okay, so Aqueon, they've essentially taken what is seawater, to a large extent, and created batteries that are fully functioning from this. They've won all sorts of awards about this for green. There's no harmful environmental risk. Yeah, good luck with that, because there's always a harmful environmental risk whenever you build up a technology. But there's no risk of explosions, no risk of fires, no corrosion.
What happens to the salt water when you can't use the battery anymore?
I don't know. You can dump it back in the sea.
Full of plastic threads?
Possibly. Who knows? Every new technology creates unintended consequences. So I don't want to say it is cleaner. Is it perfectly clean? Probably not. But now that IBM's gotten into the saltwater battery world too, people in the industry are starting to take this a little more seriously. Up until now, it was just a startup company funded in large part by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's where they got a lot of the money. There's another new technology out there called aluminum air. Aluminum air has a lot of promise for the automobile, for the batteries in automobiles. What this does is it actually uses oxygen from the air as part of the cathode within the battery. It's lighter, and the expectation is it can get more than 1,000 miles to the charge. So now you're starting to see this concept of taking new technologies as the electric vehicle becomes a thing. It gives a marketplace for some of these technologies that really didn't have an outlet before. It's going to be exciting. I mean, if electric vehicles, now I'm going to look at you and think even this, you've got to view this as a positive, right? To get rid of the gasoline, the internal combustion engine, replace it with vehicles that are cleaner, not clean, but cleaner, and more economical.
Just in time for people not to drive anymore.
Yeah, except that's not going to happen. And, of course, you make these things more available. You bring the cost of driving down. What's the logical result? More people driving.
I don't think that's true, but you go for it. I don't think so. I think people are driving less and less and less.
Well, let's hope. That's for the millennials to decide.
Yeah.
There's some other technologies like gold nanowire technologies. They're integrating this into some of the construction techniques of batteries. And where this really comes into has to do with batteries wearing out. With this technology, they've done some testing and they found that you can recharge a battery over 200,000 times with no perceptible degrading of that battery. Wow. So once again, that's a good thing, right? You make a battery that essentially lasts forever. You don't have to make as many of them.
Very anti-American.
Yeah, we'll put an end to that.
No, but they have to bottom out and throw it away like they did before.
Mm-hmm. And there's another technology, foam batteries. Foam batteries sound pretty cool. But what that's doing is when you get into the architecture of a battery, as I mentioned before, there's an anode and there's a cathode. Those are essentially two-dimensional things. Think of them like flat pieces of paper, and the electrons are going between these two flat things through that electrolyte. But a foam battery takes that 2 dimensions and turns it into almost like a spongy structure of 3 dimensions. And the anode the electrolyte is the foam that surrounds a 3-dimensional structure. The net result of that is that they're longer lasting, they will charge a lot faster, they're non-flammable, I keep saying flammable, non-toxic. In fact, with this battery, they said the only acid that they use is citric acid.
But what's the foam made of?
I don't know, foam. They claim that it's all like vegetable based, so it's non-petroleum. They're really looking at this as part of this whole idea of wearable batteries. They're really wanting to encompass your
terrible.
body. I know. Well, it gets worse when you start getting into.
They're going to implant them into your eye.
No, they want batteries with the clothing, and they recharge with the motion of the body.
How could that be healthy?
Probably not. But I think there's another thing like wireless charging, which is really super cool, right?
That wouldn't be good at all. They're zapping you.
I know. Well, what could be wrong with electricity flowing through?
And you might be being zapped, but then I'm going to get zapped too, and I don't even want to.
Well, it also what it does is at its heart, is when they're doing wireless charging, they're essentially converting electricity to sound waves, like inaudible.
So we're all going to go deaf.
Yeah, and the poor dogs are going to go crazy. But they're essentially then going to beam these energy sound waves.
Wrong.
I suspect that's going to cause some unintended consequences.
Everybody better race out and invest in some kind of hearing aid.
Well,
business.
some of the applications that they're billing, the initial applications, is, of course, wireless recharging of a mobile phone because it's too hard to plug these things in, and wireless charging of electric vehicles.
But wireless, all I could think of is how it's going to influence how your body system operates.
Mm-hmm.
Is floating around is going to influence your systems inside your body.
Hey, net benefits for the pharmaceutical industry, a win-win. So
and the mortuary. Wow.
Okay, well that's once again externalized costs. So
That's terrible. Oh my God.
But
But people are going to benefit economically.
Well,
what the heck?
All right, let me back up and basically say I am not advocating these as good
I know
versus
that.
evil.
But you love technology, whatever.
I do.
and
I find it
just think
super cool.
It's like when people say, "Oh, the atomic bomb," it's like not our fault that they actually used the discovery of atoms to kill people.
All right.
Like who couldn't see that coming?
Apparently
nobody.
You're digressing away from batteries here.
It's the same
I don't
kind of
have any atomic batteries, I'm sorry to say.
Not yet.
Well, there is one. Hey, here's one.
Okay.
Solar powered screens on electric devices. Basically, they've come up with these. You can just put like a little screen cover on your mobile phone or your laptop, or it can be on a lot of things, and it converts the solar into a charging process for your phone.
So you put it in on a window?
You could on any window of any vehicle. So that's an option. It's not really a battery.
Zapped anyway, everywhere.
Yeah, it's not a battery technology, but it's a way of recharging or keeping these things charged.
So it would just be a matter of you're just consistently feeding the system with energy, like you're plugged into the socket in the wall instead of having a battery that holds the energy for when you need it.
Right, and so you're using solar to recharge these things where otherwise you might be using some other more damaging fuel. Yeah, it's better.
Because it's not requiring a lot of chemicals.
Well, remember when I said wireless charging takes electricity or energy and converts it into sound waves? Well, there is also a way of taking sound waves and converting into electricity. And there is some experiments where people speaking on a mobile phone will actually recharge that mobile phone.
I know a lot of people that could do that.
I know. It was probably burst into flames. Whoa, slow down. Your battery's overheating.
Stop those cuss words.
So now another thing that we're moving into is the world of organic batteries. So you're getting away from some of these more acid-based or salt-based batteries into this world of organic compounds.
What's that mean, organic compound?
Well, they're more, I guess, carbon-based would be an example. But the one that everybody loves, and this one's funded again by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is urine-powered batteries.
Oh, there's a lot of people full of urine.
Right. Well, you can claim the Gates Foundation. That's. But this is kind of a cute idea.
Cute.
Well, but you're taking waste products and turning them into energy, which is not a new thing.
We've been talking about that forever and saying, why aren't we doing more of it?
Right,
so good for them. Well done.
So that's once, now the question with any technology is just because you can do a thing, are you going to do that thing? Not necessarily should you, but is the alternative cheaper, better, more efficient, all of that? Okay, we can make a battery out of urine. There might be applications for that. Like, I don't know.
Everybody pees into a bucket, then it gets sanitized, and we're full of...
This is not the direction I was hoping this particular discussion
I like this idea.
All right. Now, another thing that's taking up a lot of discussion in this field has to do with solid state versus liquid electrolytes. And I know that doesn't sound all that, interesting, sexy. It's not like urine.
I didn't know urine was sexy, but okay, you go for it.
I won't even get into a political discussion around that. But So solid state has a lot of advantages. If you think about one of the issues with batteries is that they sometimes explode, they sometimes catch on fire. Well, now you've got a solid unit, so there is no danger of that.
So it can't escape.
Yeah, well, there's not going to be any leaking. There's not going to be any of those consequences.
But it would last forever.
It might.
It might. Should, if that's what they're going to do.
I would think. I would think that would be an inherent advantage. Now, so far we've been talking about small consumer and automobile type batteries, but when you talk about solar and wind, which we've talked about on this program before, if you wanted a battery that would work on a city level or larger, campus levels, things of that nature, then you begin to look at batteries that have to be constructed differently. And the one that's holding a lot of promise are referred to as flow batteries. So the downside on wind and solar, people will always say the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. If you can store that energy when it's available and use it later, we can begin to moving as a nation, as a world, to a renewable energy based system. But the battery technology has been the big holdup. Most energy at that level is stored in the form of water, where you move the water to a higher level, then you drop it down using gravity through turbines, and you generate energy later when the sun's not shining, wind's not blowing. So these flow batteries are kind of like that, where you have two different tanks of liquid, and these two tanks of liquids, one's positively charged, one's negatively charged. And through the magical process of renewable energy, at one part during this, when you're creating that imbalance, later the electrons will flow the opposite direction. Now, I know I'm not explaining this very well, and I don't mean to explain it totally well, but the big difference here is the bigger the tank, the bigger the battery. So everything else stays the same, but you can just make bigger and bigger tanks of these liquids, and ultimately you've got a very cost-efficient way of backing up the electrical grid. So that's going to be huge.
Well, the thing that I keep thinking about is where is the government in all this? Because the reality is this takes money for research and development, and I feel like that's had a lot to do with why battery technology has not moved forward at a faster pace.
Well, batteries are the next big frontier in renewable energy, and we're beginning to see this innovation. We're not yet even to the floppy disk age of batteries. We're just getting started. But
pioneering days.
It's really exciting, and it's going to be huge. I mean, this is where the billionaires of the future are going to come out of the energy storage industry. And it's not going to look anything like what we currently experience.
Well, I hope they do better with the environment.
All right. Well, you've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank our Emmy Award-winning producer, Adam Rich, and we want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother probably told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is?
Play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and take better care of your batteries.
Okay. Until next time. Bye-bye.
We'll sing, and her children will be healed. 'Cause I see the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in the twilight. Soon we'll be together, all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.